All right, hopefully you went to the October daily participation and clicked on resubmits, and the text box opened up. You just need to type in the 3 significant points. So today we'll talk about justice in the United States of America. And the first thing I want to mention is what exactly the goal of the criminal justice system is. And really, they talk about this. For instance, if you were to go to the Pennsylvania Judicial Systems website, they have a nice video there that they talk about all this, but they basically say it's to provide everyone with their day in court and a system of equality and fairness. And that sounds simple enough and very lofty and idealistic. And really, talking about people's day in court, often we think about it from the perspective of, once again, everyone getting what they deserve. That's what a lot of Americans put into justice. The idea that if someone does something wrong or they bring harm to someone, that there should be some type of consequences. And so often that in turn implies criminal justice, but can also be civil justice as well. And civil justice or civil law is the obligation of people owing something to one another. So lawsuits, basically, people suing one another to get their job back, to get their property, to get a contract fulfilled, something they paid for, or someone hasn't been paid for something yet, or perhaps the property and child custody arrangements in a marriage. All of those things involve civil law. And so it also involves those people getting their day in court and making sure that they have full equal access that is fair. And so part of the justice system, in order to make sure that this happens, is to have a multi-step process, a hierarchy, so that people not only have the ability to have their cases heard, but also appeal them whenever they believe there is something unfair that happens, especially if it is a lack of constitutionality, both in the state and federal system. And so in the state system, for instance, citations and arraignments and original hearings happen in the magistrate's level, like with Magistrate Fish, for instance, or Magistrate Nickel in Titusville. But a lot of the actual court cases that we might see in TV shows or movies, those take place in Pennsylvania in the Court of Common Pleas, which happens in each of the county courthouses throughout the Commonwealth. And there, both criminal cases and civil cases actually occur. And in most of those cases, they happen with a jury. Now, people can, of course, waive their rights and ask for just a bench trial with just a judge. That's possible. But otherwise, when they go before the court, the plaintiff, which in the case of a lawsuit is the lawyer representing the person bringing the suit, or in the case of the state, it's the district attorney, which is a county elected official. And they're the one that's going to bring the case before the court. And they're the ones that get to present their argument first with opening statements, and then when they present evidence and call witnesses and so on, they're the ones that are going to go first. And then the people who are being brought to court by either the state or the party of a lawsuit, they're going to have a defense attorney, and they are going to have the ability to cross-examine all of the evidence or witnesses that are brought before them. So this is to bring about a sense of fairness, and that stems from the Sixth Amendment, which allows us to call our own evidence and witnesses and cross-examine people. The jury, of course, is going to listen to all of this in the meantime, and you have the right to have a jury in both criminal and civil cases, as long as they're over a certain amount of money, for instance. And then the opposing side, the defense, also gets to present their own particular point of view to the jury as well, and the prosecution, where the plaintiff on the other side has the ability to cross-examine. And then once all that's done, of course, the judge gives the jury their charge, their duty about what they're supposed to evaluate here. In criminal cases, they're supposed to find someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt or not guilty. And then the civil cases, really you just have to have what is called a preponderance of evidence, which just really means a majority. So if you had the scales of justice and you had the two sides in a lawsuit, which scale would weigh more if you put the evidence in them? So that's what has to be considered in a civil case. And then, once again, if there is some kind of vision of unfairness, especially involving constitutionality, you have the right to appeal this. In Pennsylvania, You can go to the Superior Court, which is the mid-level appeals court, or you can go to the Commonwealth Court, which just involves government-related cases. And so you do have the right to appeal that. At the federal level, once again, at the district court, that's where the original trial happens. You would be able to appeal up to one of the Circuit Court of Appeals. In Pennsylvania's case, it would be the Third Circuit in Philadelphia. And then in both the federal and state level, if you don't agree with the appeals court rulings, you have the right to appeal to the Supreme Court. In special circumstances, if the Supreme Court of the United States feels it's necessary, they will also rehear cases from the state Supreme Court, but that is unusual. Then, of course, there's the idea of justice about what we do with people once they've been in trouble, particularly with the law, if it should be focused on punishment or rehabilitation. So that's part of our justice system too. Obviously, throughout American history, we focused a lot on punishment in particular, making sure that people are kept off the streets, making sure that they go to jail, making sure they get some kind of deserved justice, and the idea that there should be some type of consequence, especially for capital crimes, extreme felonies like murder. The death penalty has often applied throughout American history. But then there's the other perspective that we should focus on rehabilitation, because obviously we can't keep all of these people in prison. The United States has one of the largest prison populations in the world, 3 million people, which is pretty significant. That's bigger than some of the states in population. And so there's the idea that we need to, of course, make sure people return to citizenship, that they can have jobs and they can pay their bills and their taxes and keep out of trouble for the rest of their lives. And so the 2 points of view is, one, of course, side of the spectrum is punishment should be the focus, and the other side of the spectrum would be rehabilitation. So the question is, which one works? Well, the American system undoubtedly focuses a lot on punishment, but other countries, especially in Scandinavia, like Sweden, focus more on rehabilitation. And so the gauge of if that is successful or not, of course, is crime low, and do these people return to crime once they're released? And when people return to a life of crime, it's known as recidivism. And so the percentage of recidivism reveals whether or not people are actually returning to crime. In the United States, the recidivism rate is over 70%. In Sweden, it's lower than 30%. Now, when people look at Swedish prisons, they see nice, comfortable rooms, and they get to watch TV and take classes and go through counseling and all this other kinds of stuff. So it doesn't really seem like prison to a lot of other people, because it is basically channeling more of that rehabilitation. So a lot of Americans don't like that idea. They don't want to pay taxes to help coddle prisoners and things like that. But obviously, there's a price to pay. If you do focus more on punishment, you can. That means if you do release prisoners, they are more likely to return to crime. Or you have the other option of just continually housing prisoners throughout the years and continuing to build that amount of people in the system, which of course costs money. So that's a trade-off that we face when it comes to what we do with our prisoners. And of course, President Trump and the Congress have worked toward trying to revitalize that system somewhat, especially for nonviolent crimes like drug possession, for instance. And we'll see if that continues later on. So then the idea of, well, does the punishment actually create a preventative measure? If you have harsh punishments, does that actually work? And a lot of the evidence doesn't necessarily point to that being an affirmative, because states, for instance, with the death penalty aren't necessarily doing better with crime than states without the death penalty. However, there are a lot of other things that have to be taken into consideration, because there's a lot of cycling that feeds into the criminal justice system, especially when it comes to economics. Not surprisingly, whenever the economy is doing worse, crime goes up. And so that happens during recessions. And so whenever you also have geographic areas that have, for instance, a lack of infrastructure and jobs, like isolated rural areas, and in some parts of inner cities, you do see higher crime rates. But once again, that's because of economics. And when people don't have enough money to move, or educational opportunity, that they have a job that they can leave and go elsewhere or move up the ranks of the employment system, then you see that economic despair kind of continues generation after generation, and then you see crime rates also continue in the same areas with the same groups of people. So that is part of the problem, is if we do want to not only create a fair, more equal United States, but also address criminal justice issues. Do we need to invest more time and money into education and other types of social programs? So that, of course, is something that costs money. So that is something else debated at the federal and state level in the United States, and it's up to every American to come up with exactly what their opinion is on those issues. Any questions about any of that? None? All right, so go ahead and submit those 3 points if you haven't done so already.